Just wanted to let you know to be Interim Commissioner Gary Tuggle speaking, IRB Chair James Stewart, and IRB Vice Chair James Coldren, C-O-L-D-R-E-N. They'll be speaking. I just wanted to go over a few things. There's a lot of people in here, so when we get to the Q&A portion of this, I'm going to call on you. So don't yell out questions, because just way too many people in here and we don't want to talk over each other. So I'll call on you. Also, this was a 207-page report that we released yesterday, just less than 24 hours ago, and we did that to give you the opportunity to read it and review it. So if there are facts that are within the body of the report that are answered, we're going to refer you back to the report if you ask a question that's answered within the report. So that's basically saying if you haven't read it and you're asking questions that are already answered, then we're going to refer you to the report. If, of course, a question is based on a fact in the report, then they'll answer it. So we're going to have the commissioner speak, the IRB chair and vice chair speak, and after that we'll have Q&A. But with that, I'll turn it over to the commissioner.
Good morning. First and foremost, I want to offer my heartfelt condolences to the family and friends of Detective Sean Suter. The situation has been a topic of discussion for many, and rightfully so. However, we must remember that there are 5 children that no longer have a father. There's a wife that no longer has a husband, and our homicide detectives no longer have a partner. My hope is that Detective Suter's family has or will see some clarity as a result of this report as they continue to mourn. In April of last year, then Commissioner Darrell D'Souza appointed an independent review board and charged them with reviewing the facts of the case. And that meant everything from Detective Suter's death, our response, our crime scene management, and more. When I took over in May, I conveyed the same message to the IRB. Active members in the Baltimore Police Department were to fully cooperate with the IRB. The IRB was given unfettered access to relevant documents, files, and evidence related to the case. The goal was simply to follow the facts as they were offered to us in the report, so that we could continue and incorporate needed recommendations into our reform efforts and again provide some level of clarity to the Suter family, the police department, and the community. I want to thank the members of the IRB for their professionalism, dedication, and commitment to following the facts, no matter where it took them, to produce this report. They were accessible. They were forthcoming with us throughout the entire review. I've had a chance to review the report. The report has now been shared with the homicide investigators who are handling Detective Suter's death. Today the case remains an open investigation within the police department. The medical examiner, who also has a copy of the report, would be the entity to make any determination with respect to change in manner of death, not the police department. I want to clarify that. Many of the recommendations of the IRB will be integrated into our agency's overall reform efforts, and some have already. For instance, the incident command staff, or my command staff, will soon be going to incident command system training. This is a necessity in public and also a very best practice, and it really points out the shortcomings in this area as described by the IRB, which also affected our investigations in crime scene management. I want to recognize that this topic has been an emotional one for the community. We're committed to getting it right and being led by the facts. I plan to take the report and use its recommendations as a guide to moving forward in training reforms. I'm proud of the investigators that originally had the case. As you'll hear soon from the chair and co-chair of the report, they were very professional and did a very, very thorough job. And again, the IRB recognizes that there's no case study for this particular incident. It's rare that you would ever see a homicide detective die in the line of duty and have to be investigated by members of his or her own unit. So with that, it makes it all the more challenging for anybody to have to investigate it. But to do that in a very thorough and professional manner is a credit to those investigators. So I want to thank them for that. With that being said, I want to extend my condolences again to the Suter family that's had to endure the unthinkable over the last 10 months. I'm now going to turn this over to IRB Chairman James Stewart and IRB Vice Chair James Colvin. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. And my name is James Stewart, and I was the chair of the IRB. Chip Coldren, Dr. Coldren was the co-chair. We're from CNA. CNA is a nonprofit analysis and solution firm in Virginia, and we provided management and coordination for the independent review process. And I wanted to say that when the Commissioner D'Souza convened us on April 12th, he gave us very specific tasks, and that was to review the homicide investigation and its finding, the Baltimore police response to the initial call, the management of the perimeters and the area in the community and to do the crime scene management review, and also review the policies and training within the police department, and to make, where possible, to make findings and recommendations based on best practice. We were given the task, and the task was to go where the evidence leads, to follow the facts, and that you will be independent, and if you need any information, the department will be open and transparent to provide that for you. I am pleased to report that that has been in fact the case. And when Commissioner Tuggle took over command, he called us in either the first or the second day of his command, and also said that we would be independent and have full access to any of the files that are within the police department. And that has continued, and this board has been independent. I just want to say that the composition of the board itself required experts who were acknowledged by their peers to be the best in the area. And we needed to find people with homicide experience and expertise, organizational management, incident command, and also a blend of familiarity with the Baltimore area, the people in the area, and the police department, as well as outsiders. So there would be a balance on the board itself. The board convened for 6 independent meetings. The board individually, each one of them worked in specific areas of expertise, brought that expertise back to the meeting, and they were thoroughly discussed. There were debates and discussions about these 4 topics and the information that we had that shed more light on that. I want to call out right now just to say that the homicide investigation that we were given was very thorough and professional. One of the things that I would also like to say is that the homicide investigation was a bit handicapped because in the incident itself, you had a SWAT response, you had the homicide people, you had patrol taking over with perimeter control. There was a whole group of different people that were managing the crime scene. And so that some of the information that was picked up was in different places in the department, and some of that was not available to some of the homicide investigation. But we were able to be able to locate that information and bring that together and help us reach findings. I want to say that the thoroughness of the IRB, the extensive review process, and the sort of support from CNA resulted in unanimous agreement on all recommendations, all findings, and all conclusions that were made in the report. So that there was each one of the decisions were unanimously supported by the IRB. That I would also like to say that that the work of the IRB did develop recommendations in the 4 areas. I just want to you have them in the report. I want to highlight maybe 3 or 4 of them, and that was that recommendation number 2 was that the Baltimore Police must immediately incorporate ICS training, that's incident command training, into the curricula of the police academy and the commanders training, and that more advanced ICS certificates should be required of those members likely to assume incident command at the rank of sergeant or higher. Recommendation 4, that and I just want to say that you just heard Commissioner Tuggle say that he's engaging in that immediately. He's not waiting for anything. He's moving out right away on that. Recommendation 4, that the Baltimore Police Department should train and designate 2 members of each patrol district to be ICS planners, and they should maintain that capability. This designation would be in addition to the members' assigned duties and would facilitate the efficient response to the critical incidents thus far lacking in the BPD. Recommendation 8 it has to do with something that the Commissioner recognized and also the homicide investigators, and that is that the BPD should refer homicide investigations or of its homicide personnel, in the event that that ever happens again, to another state or local police agency, an outside agency, because of the trauma, the conflicts of interest, and the emotionalism that is associated with that. Recommendation 14 is that the BPD should permit homicide detectives to devote all their working hours to the investigation of homicides and other activities that come within their purview. Sometimes in order to get enough officers on the street, they would strip out some of the homicide people, and they weren't able to continue that. So we're saying that you have a lot of homicides in Baltimore, and the homicide investigators are a priority. And then the final one I'd like you to think about is recommendation 18, and that's to develop a handbook for detectives, homicide detectives who are entering the investigative division, and that it should have consistent information in it that is updated regularly, so that the homicide people are representing state of the art. That's not to say that they weren't first rate. It's to say that in order to continue to be excellent, they need to be able to do that. Let me just say that the work of the IRB is now done. You have the report. The next steps in this are going to be up to the medical examiner and the police department. And they will have to take a look to see whether that other further action is required in terms of revisiting the classification of this case. I also want to say that that this IRB report is really new evidence in this case, and that it should be treated as new evidence, and that is that these agencies, the medical examiner and the Baltimore Police Department, should then use it to reinvestigate to see whether these are in fact meritorious and whether it warrants a change in their findings or their classifications. That concludes my informal remarks. And TJ, yeah, go ahead. Chip Coldren, our vice chair.
Thank you. I actually don't have a lot more to add to what Chip Stewart has said. I do want to stress that the primary purposes of this report were, as was mentioned, to bring some clarity to the situation. The other primary purpose is to get the department to focus on the future and on the reforms and on improvements. We've had several discussions with the commissioner, and we are convinced that he is taking that very seriously. We feel like many of the recommendations we present run in parallel with the work that the monitoring team is doing under the consent decree, and that they will take a look at the policies that the consent team is looking at and incorporate our recommendations into that work. So that's important. The other thing I want to say is, if you haven't looked at it already, I just encourage you to look at the bios of the members of this board. They are a tremendously talented group of people. They worked strenuously to get this report done, and I just want to publicly, on behalf of Chips and myself, thank them for the work that they did, and again, thank the commissioner and the department for the cooperation and the access that we had. So we're happy to take some questions, and I hope we can.
All right, Joy
Answer
first.
for you.
Joy?
In your opinion, what leads to this culture within the Baltimore Police Department that it seems to have such a blatant disregard for recommendations? This isn't the first time we've heard or seen you stand before us to make recommendations. What is it about this department?
Let me just say that it's characteristic of large organizations, to look within their own organization and their own culture. That is not unusual. Harvard has a number of studies about that, and that is not unusual. Our recommendations this time align very closely with previous recommendations that the Baltimore Police Department is incorporating in their reform activities that is underway now to improve the department. And the recommendations, and as you well point out, are designed to improve the department and move forward. And so that's what these recommendations are. And I may say that we can't rely on a single person to make these changes. Large organizations are going to require, a lot of help to make the change, and that help doesn't reside just with the commissioner, but it also resides with the people in the city, the mayor, the community, the media, the whole host of people have to sort of engage in this as well.
But why
Justin?
hasn't it
Chip.
happened?
Two things that
Justin next and Brian.
I'll offer. There has not been consistent leadership here, and I'm not suggesting that the prior commissioners did not have leadership qualities. None of them, the past 4 or 5 of them, have not been around long enough to implement change in an organization like that. So that's number one. Recommendations can be made, reports can be written. If there isn't a stable leadership team and stable leadership at the top over a significant number of years, it makes things very difficult, and it actually leads to confusion, because you have a second tier of deputy commissioners and command staff who are now wondering, okay, what's next? So that's one thing. The other thing I will say, and we do mention this in the report, that our impression is that largely as a result of this, but as a result of, I think, intense scrutiny on this department over the past couple of years, for instance that we all know about, that there has been this circling the wagons approach. And so that insulates the department from change. Not from all change. Good things have happened here, but it makes it more difficult when that situation exists. That's what I would offer.
Justin?
So this report was very detailed, and actually, I'd like to praise the board and the police department for releasing the videos and some of the supplemental things. I think that goes a long way. But this is being also met with a tremendous amount of skepticism, I think, within the community. Can you talk about sort of, address people who may be looking at this saying this is a really far-fetched scenario, we don't accept it?
Let me, Justin, that's a important question, and we were very careful to footnote, to document. We have sources and we have citations that can be checked, that can be looked at, so that it is not just sort of opinions, but these are facts that we developed. These are forensic tests that we ran in addition. There are videos that are now available. There's a whole host of things, and part of it, our recommendation is that they be transparent and do release the video and do release the information so that you have a chance to actually see it and to understand. One of these are, the video is fairly grainy, and they sent it to the FBI to get it improved, and they improved it as best they could, which was slightly, but it's still hard to understand. You almost need somebody to help you look at it the first couple of times. I will say that the board looked at it as an example maybe 20 times because we went over it, and we went over it, and we went over it, and we timed it, and we did a whole bunch, so it was very well studied. And that's where I say that the confidence has to be, is that, one, these are outside people. These are experts who understand this. We have looked at the evidence. The evidence is available also for the people to take a look at as well. We think we have built a compelling case. We cite 14 reasons why we reached the conclusion. They're all backed up very explicitly with either forensic facts, tests, expert testimony, eyewitness testimony that are very strongly presented there. So that we believe that there's a compelling case that reaches that, and if they read the report, the details are well documented.
All right,
Sure.
Brian,
Sorry.
Mike, and Jane. Brian, Mike, Jane.
One other comment on this first, and then, so skepticism is a healthy thing. So we wouldn't expect that all skepticism to be resolved as a result of this report. We do expect, because of the level of detail and the examination that we made of all the information available to us, that some of that skepticism will be tampered or resolved. But when people are emotionally involved in an issue, whether they're community members or police officers or police leaders, it's very difficult to look at facts and accept them. And I fully expect some of that to continue here.
So there doesn't seem to be a lot of brand new physical evidence in this report. Are you 100% certain that Sean Suter killed himself then?
We have taken a very strong look at all the evidence, and the totality of the evidence, not individually, but the totality of the evidence builds a compelling case that the conclusion is very well supported, and there is unanimity on the board that support that. Let me say that there is some new evidence that was developed by the board. One is an additional eyewitness, and the second thing is there was an additional forensic test that was asked regarding the DNA in the barrel of the gun, and the question that the medical examiner had and others was, could that have DNA been left in the barrel of the gun incidentally, just by cleaning it, and it was just one of those things that did it. We know for a fact that 3 bullets were fired through Detective Suter's gun. And the test was to see whether DNA would survive the bullet passing through and the superheated gases that propel the bullet out of the chamber. And we used 2 separate guns by officers who were on the department who actually cleaned their guns, and so their DNA might be on that. And it showed that only the DNA would only survive with the blowback from the fatal shot, and that was what was still in the barrel. So that's a new piece of evidence as well. So it's not, and if you read the report, you will see that there are some bits of new information. And we went through 40 interviews of people, and that was unusual for the IRB to do that. But we really reached out because there were some gaps in the information that we looked at.
Mike.
Thank you.
Were you able to interview Jeremy Eldridge, who's in this report, and Nicole Suter? Is there a list that we can see of people that you had interviewed?
There's a list that we provided to the department, yes.
Can we see that list?
We have to talk to the department about that. But let me just say that Jeremy Eldridge was asked several times to interview, and he declined on client privilege. And after the report was completed and handed in, he called up and said, I'd be glad to talk now. So I don't know what's going on there.
All right, Mike, and then Jane, and then David.
What about some of your criticism of the former commissioner and some of the comments that were made about this possible suspect right after this had happened? And do you think that there was any misinformation out there? The mayor had said this morning that perhaps people were misled.
Let me just say that when this happens, and you get a call, it's code 13, signal 13, it says officer down, that lots of people respond, and they respond emotionally and physically, and there's a massive response. And during that time, there's information. They said, what happened? Well, the most important thing at that moment is to try to save a life. And that's what everybody was focused on, moving, trying emergency first aid at the scene, which the videos all document, and getting them into the police cruiser rather than waiting at all and then rushing to the hospital. And there were a series of things that also delayed, very good things, like his organ donations and other kinds of things that were very positive, but it delayed the autopsy. And initially, the University of Maryland emergency room staff, medical staff, believed that the gunshot was in the back of the left side of the head, and that Sean Suiter's major hand was his right hand, and it was very tough to think about getting, so suicide wasn't a possibility. And so that information did not get corrected until 5 or 6 days later. And so that in the beginning, the information is that they thought that they may have a suspect. It turns out that Sean Suiter's partner did not actually see the suspect, but heard the description from the detective, and that's what he gave as the information. And but the evidence is very complete. There were only 8 seconds that somebody could have gotten in, done this, and escaped, and like that. So that was all pieced together later with this analysis. So it took some time. We are critical of the former commissioner in the fact that he did not update the narrative, and continue to say that there was a long, physical struggle. There was a killer loose, and the killer looks like, and he described a sort of a general description of that. And as I said, 4 days later, information changed, and some of the information is that he was also the subject of a grand jury inquiry, and was going to be the very next day he was going to appear regarding the gun trace task force. And there were some issues involved. We did talk to the FBI, and we also talked to the acting U.S. attorney as well.
Jane?
I just want to ask a quick follow-up, and then I have another question. But just to that, you interviewed Kevin Davis. What did he tell you about why he stuck to that narrative?
He said that he was trying to stick to the facts. And he said that suicide was always a possibility in his mind, but that he felt that it was unlikely, that the most likely situation was in fact that there was an unknown killer that had done this.
The report states that one of the problems in this investigation was that important information wasn't shared internally with investigators. For example, exactly what was Sean Suiter's status with the federal government. Did you find that important information like that or other things may not have been shared with the medical examiner before that office made its ruling?
Yes.
Can you give us an example?
Well, when they were performing the autopsy, the medical examiner observed that there was a contact wound to the right side of the head as opposed to what they had considered to be the entrance wound on the left side. He said that was an error, and she said that is suicide a possibility? And one of the people that were there from the police department said no.
Even though at that point that was very much a possibility.
Well, the person that was there didn't know that at that, but that became a very much a possibility as new facts developed.
Was the information about Suiter's status as a witness under limited immunity agreement shared with the medical examiner?
You'll have to talk to the medical examiner about that.
David?
Quick question on the medical side. So you've been critical of former Commissioner Davis and the BPD in the report. What do you make of the apparent sloppiness on the medical side with shock trauma, initially saying that it was the gunshot was on the left side of his skull, but it was actually on the right side. It was only found out 4 days later. How much do you think the medical sloppiness may have distorted the subsequent investigation?
I would not characterize it that way. I would characterize it as an effort to save a person's life who was mortally injured. They literally cleaned him. They gave everything that they could. He survived until the following day through the very strong efforts of the medical staff. That was not a priority to determine where the gunshot was, and so in the rush to do this, that it's perfectly understandable that these kinds of errors would be made. The difficulty is that it all of a sudden gets into a permanent narrative, and you hear about it, and you keep saying, well, why are you changing the story? And it turns out, I would not call it sloppiness.
But you said it took 4 days for them to correct that information from shock trauma. At that point, there was already an aggressive manhunt underway.
Yes, but the reason it took 4 days is because they moved on to other things in shock trauma. And the medical examiner didn't get an opportunity to do the autopsy until the organs that had been donated had been donated. And as a result, you had that 4 or 5 day delay before the information came from the medical examiner that, oh, wait a minute, it's on this side over here. And the person that was in the room from BPD, one of 3, said, no, suicide's not a possibility because he was operating from the previous narrative. He didn't realize that, is what I'm saying.
So Baltimore police homicide detectives surely interviewed Bamega for their investigation.
Yes.
And in this report, Bamega says that he didn't see what Suter was pointing out to him into the alley, and that's why he ran in. So to what extent did your investigators look at the theory that many in the community are saying this was a hit put on Suter by the BPD?
I refer
Someone in the BPD.
I refer you to the report. The report goes into that very extensively. It's theory number 2, I believe. Is that, I think it's right, where it was unknown suspect or somebody else had done this. It turns out that it's because we have the 2 eyewitnesses and the videotape, we were able to exactly time sort of the sequence of events. And there was a total of 8 seconds when somebody wasn't being observed. And you couldn't get in, do that, put the evidence in, raise the arm up, close the arm. It was not possible, absolutely not possible physically. And it was, they had cleared the alley, they'd gone around, so that was not the case. They had new officers on the scene with body-worn cameras in less than 4 minutes. That was all being recorded. And if you can hear the emotion in Detective Bomeca's voice as he's trying to save Sean's life, that it is just heart-wrenching.
Mallory, then Bank.
Aside from the protocols, the misinformation, maybe the leadership, how did emotion play into this investigation?
People had strong feelings, and just like it's very tough to be an objective reporter when you have strong feelings. My colleague, the very esteemed Dr. Coldren, he talked about the fact is when you're emotionally involved, it's very tough to evaluate facts. And I think that pretty well answers the question. I'm just going to leave it there.
I just want to clear up a factual matter. It says that that Herschel wrote a letter on December 10th that made sense of some of the missing data that Suter had, and said also that Herschel had pleaded guilty and agreed to cooperate. But he was one of the 2 who didn't plead guilty. Was there a different plea at that point, or did you mean a different officer, and was there a mistake in that?
No, I believe it's the same Herschel. It's spelled the same way, but I refer you to the report.
But it wasn't one of the other officers who had pleaded guilty, and just the name got mistaken.
There was also Gondo, and there was that's it. But I will refer to the sequencing in the report. We were very careful about that. I'm sorry.
D and then Alec.
Yeah, I was
Yes, sir.
going off of what Maynard said. That was a major mistake. Herschel definitely pled not guilty. And I wanted to know if you feel like there are many more mistakes in the court. Should we be able to trust it with something like that floating around?
I didn't think that was a mistake, but I will look into it.
He
Okay.
definitely pled not guilty. It's on page 52.
He actually went to trial.
Yeah.
Okay, he went to trial and was convicted. Is that right?
He didn't cooperate with the government,
Okay.
which is very clearly says in this report that he did.
So I want to know
I'll
how many
take a look.
mistakes you feel like that are floating around in a report.
Well,
Can we trust it with something that heavy being prevalent?
That's your judgment to make, sir. I mean, if you find other mistakes and if they're, overwhelming and overbearing, then come to your conclusion. We stand behind this report unanimously, 100%. And if we made a mistake like that, we'll fix it.
Alec, and then we'll
But thank
get
you.
back around. All right, Alec.
Yeah, just going back to your criticism of the former commissioner's remarks in those weeks, was it your sense that those remarks were sincerely made at the time, that he stuck with that narrative as long as he did, or that they were somehow motivated by the fact that a homicide of an officer was in some sense a better story for a lot of people involved, including the department, ending up with a hero's funeral that got a lot of sympathy for the department and whatnot? Or do you feel like they were in fact sincere and just what best of what he knew at the time?
I'm not able to speculate what was in the commissioner's mind, and I do know that he cares a great deal about this department and the men and women in the department, and that's all I can say.
All right, Justin, then back around.
So, the suicide theory hinges a lot on him feeling like the gun trace task force investigation may be bearing down on him, and it really seems like he was not the target of that grand jury. No one else has been indicted since the middle of last year in that case, despite people being accused of things. No new accusations have emerged against him, and it seems like no crucial information and damning information was sort of found on his cell phone. I guess his personal computer wasn't searched at all, which I don't understand. But I mean, do you have any qualms about saying that this man was so, he felt like the walls were closing in him to take this extreme step to sort of commit suicide and stage it to look like a homicide over this?
Initially, we looked into that because we did have questions. We did not form an opinion until we got into the third or fourth meeting. And there were, and it lays it out, and let me just say this, it lays it out in the report about the checking the different things on his computer, the deletions and the other things. I think we have to let the report speak for itself there.
Brian and Jane.
So, but as Justin was saying, the connection to the GTTF trial is a fairly large one in this report, but this is a fairly large mistake in this report. And so, as my colleagues were questioning you about how this is a big mistake, because this is a fairly large public trial that we all covered, that he went to trial, and it went on for weeks, but it says in here that he pled guilty. But beyond that, did you guys also interview other people in his family or in his life to help state of mind that this grand jury may not have been the only thing that was stressing him out to make him commit suicide? Did you speak to Nicole Suter? Did you speak to any of his children? Did you speak to any of his family or friends about where his state of mind was beyond just this grand jury testimony?
We did not do any kind of psychological analysis. We didn't do any kind of post-mortem about that. We
you
felt
not
that
think that's important for state of
that
mind?
exceeded the scope of our capability at the time.
Is that not important when you're talking about a decision like this by a single man?
Well, let me just say this, we followed the information and we followed the facts. And it took us where it took us. And just as with Commissioner Davis, we do not attempt to understand what he was thinking, what his state of mind was when he took the actions that he did. We can't surmise that about Detective Suter. We can't. He's an individual. Lord knows what was going on in his mind, and we could try as hard as we want. We may find out a few other things, but we'll never know everything. And it's the facts that we found and that we discovered that brought us to this conclusion.
So then I go back to my original question. With 100% certainty, can you say that Sean Suter committed suicide?
We can say that we've increased the confidence in the finding of the report, and that's where we're going to leave it.
Jane?
I'd like to ask Commissioner Kimball a question.
Sure.
Do you accept the findings of suicide in this case?
I accept the facts as they're presented in the report. There is still more to be done. As has been indicated, the report represents additional evidence. Obviously, the police department is not going to determine the manner. That's going to be left to the medical examiner's office. I'll just leave it at that.
I want to ask one follow-up question because the report spends quite a bit of time on the misleading of the public, as you have discussed. Have you made or planning to make significant change in how your department interacts with the public in these kinds of cases and in other cases where public information is so vital?
I've said since I've taken the job that transparency is extremely important to the department, it's important to the community, and it's important to our personnel moving forward. That credibility is critical to regaining the confidence of the public. And I think you've seen in recent times that we have made an attempt to be far more transparent, and we're going to continue to do that.
Mary Rose?
So, in the report, the IRB says that the BPD didn't learn from its mistakes regarding the ICS. Are there other instances where the IRB sees this besides the ICS?
You mean besides the BPD and other police
No,
departments?
are there other instances where the IRB sees that the BPD didn't learn from its mistakes in the past?
Yes,
Okay. Well, and then the other thing is, one thing that I learned in this report.
but I want to say, I don't want to leave it there. I don't want to tell you that they are making progress. They have implemented many things, and some of them have been partially implemented, but not fully implemented.
And it says that Detective Suter had partial impunity.
Immunity.
Immunity. Did your detectives find out more about that, and can you explain that?
I can't explain that. It was a decision that was negotiated between his attorney and the federal prosecutors and investigators.
David?
Do you think that Commissioner Davis, last year, when he was talking about this investigation in the wake of everything, when he was saying, I've been assured numerous times that Detective Suter was not the target of the grand jury probe, do you think that he was misleading folks? He was the subject, possibly, potentially, which doesn't
No,
mean
he
he's
was,
innocent.
let me just say that we talked to the acting U.S. attorney, and we also, who was in charge of that case, and we talked to the SAC from the FBI, Gordon Johnson, and both of them said he was a subject. He was not the target, but he wasn't a witness. He occupied that space. There's a footnote in there that defines that exactly. Okay, so that a subject is in fact the correct term. And, I mean, that's what they said. I mean, correct by meaning that he didn't change the term.
Hey, can I ask
Joy-
one question
okay.
to Commissioner Tuggle, Acting Commissioner Tuggle? Just one quick question about morale, how this is impacting morale. Obviously, this is a hugely high-profile case. It's one of your own. What has been the impact of this report, this new report, on morale?
Well, I met with Homicide prior to releasing the report yesterday to let them know what the conclusions were. As I said before, but I also wanted them to know that another conclusion was that the original investigators did a very professional and thorough job. I thought it equally important that they know that so that they would not be called into question in terms of what they did to try to vet out the facts of the investigation.
All right, Jordan and Boehner for the last question. We'll start wrapping it up. Yeah, you get a question. You get one. You get the last question.
Was there any evidence you came across that suggested homicide detectives were told not to pursue the suicide theory? And if so, what was it?
There was a lot of eagerness to pursue the unknown suspect one.
On whose part?
The homicide investigators said that that was the narrative that was of most interest to their leaders.
But were leaders told?
We're not aware of any instance that somebody told them to not do anything.
Right,
Not at all.
that's why I'm saying
Yeah.
that nobody was directed not to look at that.
All right, Boehner?
Can you say any more about the 2008 robberies with Gondo? If there were other officers involved that came to light in this, or if there's been any information, any attempt to contact the citizens who were robbed, or anything else that came out of that, and also the March 2016 contacts with Gondo. Any more about their relation?
No, we really confined our entire look to the incident of November 15th.
And you get the last question.
So you said Detective Suter's attorney had reached out after you published your report and said he would be now willing to talk.
this could go to you guys or Commissioner Tuttle. Do you expect to glean any additional information that could support this conclusion from talking to his attorney?
Well, certainly homicide's going to follow up. We've already attempted, or homicide's already attempted a follow-up, and they'll continue to do so. Again, they're going to go where the facts take them.
Hey, appreciate all of you guys for being respectful of one another and us. Have a good one. Thank you.
Thank you.